Hey, Robbie.
Hey Todd, how you doing?
Hey, we're live. I just realized, hey, we just went live. We're on the internet live, talking to people. It's 3 o'clock on Friday Eastern, February, last day of February.
It's the last day of February and we're still here. In fact, you didn't think I was going to be here, Todd.
I didn't think you were gonna be, but first, let's describe what is here. Where are we? What are we doing here, Robbie?
Well, this is AWS On Air, our weekly show on Fridays where we recap service launches, announcements, and you get to hear from the very experts who design the services themselves. And we're placing specific emphasis on those origin stories. You might be wondering, how did insert service here come about? You get to hear those behind the scenes stories. You get live demos, emphasis on live. So we'll see what happens. And I'm happy to be here with yourself here today, Todd.
Yeah, I like to tell people this is our flagship launch show. We're talking about all the hottest, latest, and greatest launches at AWS, which there are a lot of. If you've been a follower of the show, which I just found out we have about 115,000 followers and we need more followers. So follow the show, stay up to date. We are launching something all the time. Jeff Barr, who usually comes on this show, has got his work cut out for him because he's always got like a list of stuff. But we're going to get into it today. We're talking about EKS, some new cool stuff with EKS. I know there's a lot of cube heads out there. I don't know if that's the right term, but that's what I'm going to call them. And then we're also talking about the launch of something that's near and dear to Robbie's, which I understand you were taking some time off. We joked in our LinkedIn promo video that you were installing some stuff, but that's not true. What were you actually doing on your time off, Robbie?
I was just playing golf. I was not installing local zones, much to your dismay. But I was playing golf, and there was a funny story. Just hanging out with my dad, having a good time. You know, you hit the ball forward. You try pace of play is such that you want to keep moving, not make people upset. We may have hit the ball ever so slightly too close to the group in front of us. We're like 300 some yards ahead. And what do? They pick up the ball, drive their cart 300 yards back, and return the ball and start yelling at us. So that was how I ended my day on Thursday before I flew back. Brutal.
Yeah, I have so many questions. I would be that guy that was bringing the ball back to you, like, "Hey, man, like I'm here." But the live show, we got a chat going. People are starting to pop into the chat. We see friends from. There's our friend Adrian. We have some friends from India jumping in. We want to hear what you're thinking about in the chat. Do you golf? Have you ever hit into somebody else? Have you ever been hit into on the golf course? I'm sure there are some. I actually have a horror story myself of that. My father-in-law got hit by a ball last year on vacation, and yeah, that's not a good thing.
Safety first. But we want to hear from you in the chat. Tell us your golf horror stories
Germany.
or of Kubernetes. What did you call it? Are you a Kubernetes
cube head?
A cube head? Tell us if you're a cube head. If you've used AWS Local Zones, tell us about your favorite local zone in a city near you. And more importantly, if you have no idea what either of those two services are, buckle up. You're about to learn a whole lot this show. And I think we should introduce our first guest. What do you think?
Yeah, Sue, I'm ready.
Let's bring out Amin from the EKS service team.
Hey, Amin, welcome to the show. You're live on the internet. That's my favorite thing to say is being live on the internet. Like, that's a new thing. I think it's been around for a while. But you're here with us on the AWS OnAir show. Amin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? And not only introduce yourself, but tell us what you do. What would you say you do here at AWS?
Hey, so my name is Amin. I'm a software engineer at AWS. I'm part of the EKS service team, also known as Elastic Kubernetes Service. So basically, we build systems that manage Kubernetes for you, and we build some cool stuff around it that we're going to show today.
That's right. Here at AWS, we actually have a managed Kubernetes service. We call that EKS, meaning that AWS manages the hardware and the patching of Kubernetes. And then all you have to worry about are your nodes and your clusters and your configuration of those things. But AWS kind of manages the keeping the lights on and the electricity feeding to those servers, right? That's what we got going on. And I mean, quick question for you. Is Kubehead a thing? Did I just make that up? Or am I going to start something here?
No, it doesn't exist, but I think it could be a very cool open source project for Kubernetes.
All right, I'm starting to hear. You've heard it here first on AWS OnAir. Cubeheads, welcome to the channel. Hopefully that doesn't offend anybody. Okay, so Amin, we're talking about something that you've built recently for EKS. Is that right?
Yep.
When
Today we're going to talk about KRO.
KRO. KRO is an acronym. What is KRO? What is it? What does KRO stand for?
Kube Resource Orchestrator.
See, I knew I was onto something with this cube head thing. Cube Resource Orchestrator, shortened as KRO, not the bird, but the new service, the new feature.
And so before we start unpacking the KRO itself and how to use it, for those who are experiencing or who haven't experienced Kubernetes before, I've got a challenge for you, Amin. Any chance you can condense, I don't know, 7 years of history of Amazon EKS into what did customers ask for that motivated us to create a managed Kubernetes service in the first place? And then to the extent you can share, what have been some of those problems along the way that led you to creating KRO in the first place?
So sure, yeah, let's talk about Kubernetes first. So Kubernetes is a platform that let you deploy container workload on top of any infrastructure. There is something really cool that a lot of people love about Kubernetes is that it's purely declarative, and there's like what we call reconciler systems under the hood, meaning that you just describe your view of the world, and there will be a system under the hood trying to reach that desired state. Meaning that all you have to do is say like, hey, here is my application, here's the number of replicas I want, and you let the cluster go and figure out how to do it. You don't really think about where it's going to be running, how, if it's going to fail in the future. If it fails, there will be something behind the scenes that's going to fix it. So that's like a very short introduction to Kubernetes. Why did we build EKS? Well, if you really like go deep into Kubernetes, you can understand there's a very, very complex system to deploy. A lot of people say like, hey, I'm not going to use Kubernetes because it's very complex, which is very true. To manage your own Kubernetes and deploy it on top of your own servers or even on top of EC2 directly, it is very, very complex. So we built Amazon EKS to manage Kubernetes for you because we don't want you to deal with that complexity. You just hit a button, create cluster, we go and set up everything under the hood for you. And all you have to do is just go and consume Kubernetes API, do all the cool things that you want to do on top of it.
Awesome. So maybe if we fast forward now to 2024, 2025, more and more abstractions are getting created by the open source community. Things like EKS Cuddle, easier way to create a cluster. I don't even have to think. AWS controllers for Kubernetes, as we were talking about before the show, starting to automate in a Kubernetes way various things that you wouldn't have typically expected to talk Kubernetes. How did we get to KRO where we're saying, you know what, we need to now take care of custom resource? Can you help explain the world of custom resources? Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, so one of the hottest features in Kubernetes is custom resources. And with that, we mean that Kubernetes is an extensible system, meaning like today, I mean, originally it was designed to deploy container workload, but today it can really do anything. It can create AWS objects, it can manage them, it can even order you a pizza if you want. Really, you can do whatever you want with it. And trust me, there is a controller, there's an extension for Kubernetes that let you order pizza right from your cluster. It's a thing. So that's the power of Kubernetes. It's a standard, it's an API, and people love that API. It's pretty straightforward, and whenever you want your cluster to do anything extra on top of managing workloads, you just go ahead and configure a custom, what we call a custom resource definition, or a custom resource.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some folks joining the chat that are new to this world of EKS. Who we have one person in the chat just said they're new, but they haven't used it yet, but they're studying. So I think for folks who are just learning Kubernetes, we can talk a little bit about like containers. They sort of standardize the deployment configuration for the apps that run inside of them. And there's a couple of reasons why you would want to do that. I'm an app developer back in my earlier days of application development. Containerization was all the rage because it was like the whole, it works on my machine problem, but then when we go to deploy, it doesn't work, right? So containers were a way to sort of solve that. And then we started getting into distributed computing. We want the same application running. We want more computational resources to be able to distribute the load across maybe different servers or different clusters. And that's when we talk about nodes. We have these nodes sort of orchestrating collaboratively to deliver some sort of application or some sort of functional purpose. And so containers, there's a couple different ways to do containerization, but Kubernetes is one of those. And you're saying that configuring and setup, all of that can get very complicated. And then you start talking about custom resources, which just gives another layer of complexity. But you've developed something called KRO that gives you even more power and control over those custom resources, from what I understand. Is that right?
That's correct. So if you really want to deal with custom resources in Kubernetes, like managing Kubernetes is very complex. There's a lot of systems that need to be built. There's literally like code that you need to write, a lot of configuration files and manifests. And with KRO, basically, we just removed all that complexity. No more code, just declarative configuration.
Yeah, kind of in line with like, I'm kind of like a history buff in programming, because I love the history of how we started with like literally punch cards where you have to like punch a 1 or a 0. It was either on or off, and that's how the machine interpreted. And then you get this next layer of abstraction, and we start talking like basic. We're not punching 1s and 0s, but we've abstracted away. But anyways, you get to this point where all of a sudden now we've got so many layers of abstraction between what we started with, and all that does is offer a more simple interface, still the complexity underneath the hood there, or is what did Werner call it at reInvent? I love this term, simplexity. You don't remove complexity, you abstract it away. And so now we have this simple interface, but there's all this underlying complexity. And that's kind of what I hear, like kind of KRO is this next level of abstraction, removing complexity. And now I'm talking myself up. I'm ready to see it. I'm like getting excited to see this demo. Should we bring up your screen and show folks how this works?
Yep, absolutely. I will share my screen right now. Are you able
yeah,
to
we want to,
see?
and while you're pulling it up, I want to make sure that our checking in on our chat, they're not falling asleep on us on the keyboard. We want to hear your questions. We've got Amin. He is an expert EKS. Like whatever you wanted to know about Kubernetes, Amin's going to answer that question. I'm going to put him on the spot here. So drop your questions in the chat and let us know what you got for Cube. What are our Cube heads got? That's what I want to know. All right, Amin, it's all yours. Take it away, buddy.
Sure, thank you. So for today, I have very simple examples of Kubernetes. I wanted to explore a little bit with you all how Kubernetes looks like and why. I mean, what is the typical like user experience in Kubernetes? So for today, I have a terminal. I'm gonna show a few manifests here and what is Kubernetes, what is ACK, and how KRO fits into the full story. And for that, I'm gonna be using a Kubernetes cluster that is already provisioned before this demo. It's running on top of EKS, and I have a command line. I have an alias I'm going to be working with called K, so it's just like an abbreviation of kubectl. And kubectl is just a command line that lets you talk to Kubernetes. So I can be like, hey, give me the cluster information, like where is this cluster running? And you can see here that we have a load balancer pointing to our nodes in AWS, and that we're ready to go.
Okay, yeah. So you have a cluster live, and I want to say hello to Adriana. She came on. She's watching from DC. She's learning about this topic. I'm learning right with you, Adriana. So we have a cluster up and running. That cluster has some nodes in it. Those are our compute resources, and you're just asking, hey, are you on? Does it work? And you're using a CLI to do that. So we've confirmed that it's up and running.
Yes, that's true. So I can, for example, here I can be like, hey, can you show me all the nodes that are running in the cluster? And you can see here that I have 5 nodes running on AWS, and they're connected to my cluster, ready to receive workload. I have already like a few things running in here, but we're not going to show them for the demo. So typically in Kubernetes, if you run an application, what you would do is submit a manifest that looks like this. It's a very simple one. You're saying like, hey, I want you to deploy something. So the kind or the type of the thing we're creating is called a deployment. For this deployment, we want only 1 replica. I mean, we can also increase it to 5 or 10 for the high availability of the application. And for our template in here, we want to run a container that has an Nginx, which is just an HTTP proxy. And I want to expose everything to the port 80. So if you deploy this to your cluster, what's going to happen is that Kubernetes is going to consume this manifest in here, go and deploy it, and you're ready to go. This is literally everything you have to do in Kubernetes. But for today, we don't want to really like show applications. It's like a pretty simple example. We want to show a little bit more advanced things. So we talked about custom resource definitions and how can you extend Kubernetes to do some really awesome things. Well, for today, we have an example called an S3 bucket. So how would you create an S3 bucket from within Kubernetes? And some of you might question, like, hey, why would I even want to do this? If you're a Kubernetes expert and you're only familiar with the kubectl command, the CLI of Kubernetes, or the Kubernetes world ecosystem, which is very rich and have a lot of tools around it, sometimes you don't want to leave your cluster or your environment. You don't want to go and learn new other complex tools to manage your AWS resources. What if we brought AWS inside your cluster? And this is what we have an example for today. Is like, hey, by extending Kubernetes, you can have something like an S3 bucket. And in this situation, I can ask the cluster to create an S3 bucket for me. And in this situation, I can do something like, hey, can you go and create this bucket? So you can see here that the bucket got created. If I do get buckets, I should see something called AWS OnAir demo. And if I hit list all my buckets and grab the AWS OnAir, I'm going to see that I have a bucket that just got created a few seconds ago.
So to recap, you could have created a bucket through the AWS command line interface saying, hey, AWS S3 create bucket. But now you're saying, hey, if you prefer to speak Kubernetes as opposed to speaking the AWS CLI, then you can declaratively say, hey, I want this bucket, and it will accomplish the same result through Kubernetes.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way that you said that we're bringing AWS into the Kubernetes world. And so if you're a diehard Cube head, you speak Cube. I don't know what the language would be, but Cube. You can now tell Cube through a familiar interface, hey, go do this AWS thing, and you don't have to go learn some other command line interface. That's a nice summary, Rebbe. I like that. And I mean, is this CRO? Did you just show us CRO? You went really fast there. Is that what CRO is?
Not yet. So
okay.
Right now we're just showing. This is called ATK. So this is AWS controllers for Kubernetes.
Okay.
It's an extension of Kubernetes. Actually, it's an open source project that is you can find on GitHub. It's free. You can install it and use it on any Kubernetes cluster that lets you manage AWS resources. You can name it DynamoDB tables, RDS, databases, I don't know, Lambda functions, whatever you want, you can find it there.
Yeah, cool.
So what we're not showing, so this is ATK. What we're not showing here is that you have other attributes. Like, for example, you want to add tags. You can have like, hey, this is, for example, prod tag name value. And you can have things like this in ATK. But for today's demo, we're not going to show this. This is like to show like, hey, you can have multiple flavors of Kubernetes, and you can do really whatever you want with it. So let's dive into a little bit, something a little bit more complex. In a typical world, when you're running an application on top of Kubernetes, you actually want both of these objects. You want a deployment and a bucket to be created, connected somehow together, so it can work with AWS. If you've seen how we do this in typically in AWS, when you want to create a complex application, say you have an S3 bucket, DynamoDB, a few IAM roles, and let's say an RDS database, what you would usually use is something like CloudFormation or Terraform or CDK, because you really want to like simplify or create abstractions on top of all these very small elements that can be managed one by one. So let's talk a little bit about CRO. CRO is exactly trying to solve this problem. Can we really have something like CloudFormation or CDK or Terraform inside of our cluster? I don't want to go and manage my S3 buckets manually. I don't want to manage my deployments. I want to manage an abstraction that will go and create a bucket and a deployment for me. And by that, I mean like, hey, I want something that looks exactly like this. I want just to provide an application, give you a name, my image, a number of replicas, and a bucket name. I don't care like how you're going to do it. Just go ahead and provision a bucket for me. Go and mount, let's say, the bucket ARN into the environment variables of that deployment, and let me know when everything looks all right. So In order to do that, so if you want to like do something typically in Kubernetes, you will have to create what we call custom resources and build your own extension of Kubernetes by writing literal code and let it go and create 2 resources under the hood. But with CRO, you don't actually have to do anything besides just configuring CRO to do these things for you. So let's walk into what is like the equivalent of a construct in CRO. I want to create this new construct called application. I want you to go and whenever I deploy this, I want you to create a deployment and a S3 bucket and connect them together. So let's open this on the side. You can see here the first thing that we want to really teach to CRO or ask CRO to do is like, hey, we want an application and we want these 5 fields to be available to the user. And you can see here that in CRO on lines 6 to 13, all we have to do is provide basically this information that we see in here, where we're creating a new abstraction called application. We want the users to provide a name, an image, a bucket name, and a replicas. And if not provided, I want you to give me a default number of replicas. And you can see in here the same way we defined a deployment before. This is how you do a deployment. You just go ahead and request from CRO to create a deployment for you. And you can see here that as well, we're creating an S3 bucket. So we have these 2 resources that needs to be managed by CRO. And you can see here that we're using dynamic names. We're saying like, hey, I don't want you to use a static name. I want you to go and use the bucket name provided by user, the user, which is like here on our left, and use that as a name for the S3 bucket.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to give you a heads up. We got just a few minutes left, so I want to make sure that we get through. I like the side-by-side comparison. We're creating this construct of resources that often go together, and so you're making it easier with CRO by defining that resource set, that group of resources, and then you can just reference that group. But I want to make sure that we can kind of show this in action. We got just a few minutes left.
Yeah, sure. So let's go ahead and deploy this. The first thing you'll have to do in CRO is just go ahead and deploy what we call a resource graph definition, and I will get later to why is it called a graph. So I'm gonna go ahead and create the construct that we have in here. So if I do, all right, it's flying. It should be arriving soon. Okay, it's here. And if I do get RGD and I want my application, we can see that it's up and running behind the scenes in the cluster. Okay, now all we have to do is to provide the configuration in here, nothing more. We're gonna go ahead and do an apply. I want my app, and in this situation, we want an app called my app Nginx, and I want the bucket name to be created AWS OnAir and some suffix in there, postfix. And I'm gonna go ahead and create it. You can see that we created in here, and all we have to do is get my applications. And it should be, oh, it was so fast. So in 8 seconds, it was already created, and it tells us that everything is active. And if I look under the hood, do I have an S3 bucket? Yes, I have something that got created 17 seconds ago. And if I check the deployments, we're going to see that we have an app of replicas 5.
Nice.
And if I check the application internally, you can see that there is something extra in here, is that CRO injected the S3 bucket on inside the environment variable. This is just coming from the construct itself. You can see that here we're defining an environment variable this way.
Very cool. So I'm going to recap this while we are giving our audience one more chance to ask a question with you, Amin. So you've defined what the construct is and what should exist in that construct, and you deployed that construct to your cluster. And then once you've done that, you can reference that construct in one of your your CRO application configuration, and you can say apply this, and it knows, because it's referencing that construct, that it should create these resources within AWS. And what you just showed was one of those things being an S3 bucket, and now you can use the ARN and reference that ARN in other configurations.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. That's okay. It's cool. Any other questions from our chat there? Let's see. Let's check the chat.
While we're doing that, where should folks get started to learn more, Amin? Go right to GitHub and get started?
Yeah, so CRO is an open source project. We open sourced it in November last year. you can go ahead and install it. It's on GitHub. We have a website called KRO.run, which should be linked very soon. It's a very simple concept. There's only one CRD, only the RGD, so the resource graph definitions. And it doesn't really require AWS to get started. You can install it on Kind, and you can play with it with Minikube. I don't know, like pick your flavor of Kubernetes, and you can install it and play with it.
Hey, I mean, we do have a question here. Does this Code wants to know if this at all works with SAM or CDK constructs? Is there any kind of interoperability there?
So KRO lives inside the cluster. It's an extension of Kubernetes. So you have to install it into the cluster to run, while CDK is a client-side tool, so it runs outside of the cluster. There is something we call CDKs, and CDKs lets you manage Kubernetes resources outside of the cluster. So it's a CLI that could talk to your cluster. And technically, yes, you could use CDKs to create RGDs or resource graph definitions and manage them in the cluster.
So if you want to get real creative, you can get some like a little bit of connective tissue there to get these things to talk. But this is a very Kubernetes specific tool set living inside the cluster.
Yes.
Cool. Hey, well, Amin, thanks for coming on. I hope folks go and check out your demo on GitHub and read the blog or the other resources that are posted in the chat. Thanks for the demo, Amin. Great work.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we'll see you later.
Good.
Robbie, how you feeling, man? Are you crowed out? You catch that? Oh, Amin's back.
Oh, he's back. I mean,
now he's gone.
People have been raving about Kubernetes the moment that we launched Amazon EKS, and I think that was back in, I think it was 2017 or 2018. And it's incredible to see just the evolution of customer feedback and how quickly we implement it right into EKS itself, then the surrounding open source libraries that make our lives so much easier and flexible. So huge fan of what you and the team are doing.
I'll be honest with you. I was a Kubernetes noob when I came to AWS. I didn't have a need. I mean, I was running Docker stuff and I was doing containerization, but I always went like kind of a different route. And then I came to AWS and I realized how huge Kubernetes really is and all the different things. And then how massively and important it was that we offered a managed Kubernetes service for customers so they didn't have to worry about all of these really complex behind the scenes just to get a cluster up and running. So I'm learning something new every day. And now to see the tool set start to mature and all the different ways that you can manage the cluster and work inside the cluster in parallel with all the same, similar type of constructs and things that we're doing with other native AWS services. It's just always something new, man, something cool. I might become a kubehead after this.
I think you should make a shirt and then come back the next time we're co-hosting around EKS and display the first of a kind kubehead and see if it resonates. I see Wesley Eddins here in the chat. Kube Resource Air, Kube Resource OnAir. I love it. Segment 1 this week is all about, AWS Cron Air. But now we're moving towards AWS on Edge as we explore.
Oh, yeah. Real quick, before we jump into that, I was actually looking at the GitHub for KRO. It's an open source thing. I was looking at the GitHub issues, and somebody said we needed a logo for KRO. That was one of the top issues and feature enhancements. So once we get that logo for KRO, I'll make that T-shirt for you, Robbie. But you're saying, well, let's. Sorry, I interrupted your segment transition. You're talking about.
In fact, I jumped the gun here. I totally forgot that. I know if I was watching the show right now, I'd have feedback to say, kick me off the show as a host. And if you want to feedback, the first 20 people who fill out our survey that we're going to put right here in the chat, tell us what you want more of, what you want less of, what you want to see different. And we'll give you some $20 in AWS credits, which you could use to launch your first EKS cluster.
Nice. I like how you did that. Tie it right in. Yeah, take the survey. I want to know. I definitely want to know. I don't read them personally, but I get secondhand survey results from our producer, and I like to try to ruin his weekends with as many surveys as we can possibly submit. So, yeah, do that survey. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Robbie, for remembering to do that. I almost forgot.
I completely forgot. But what I do know is I think I'm about to go off video because you need to introduce your next guest. And technically, I'm not the host. I'm not the guest. I'm a ghost.
We're breaking precedent here. Kick him off the stream. I'm going solo. Hey, everybody. We're going solo. We're going to break precedent here and introduce the next. We have a special guest this week for our AWS OnAir show. Let's bring in Robbie and in our other guests, Sylvia. Sylvia and Robbie, you're next up. How'd I do? Hi, Sylvia. Welcome to the show.
Hey, I was going to question with Robbie. Hey, Robbie. Hey, Todd.
Hey, Robbie. I don't think we've ever met before. Nice to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Well, since we already kind of know who you are, Robbie, let's go ahead and introduce Sylvia. Sylvia, can you introduce yourself, and will you let the folks know what do you do at AWS? What do you do day to day? What's your main workload, to put it in the cloud terms?
Yeah, sounds good. Of course. Thanks for having me. Hey, everyone. I'm a product manager on AWS EC2, and I'm working on AWS Local Zones. So bringing more local zones into more metropolitan areas to bring compute and other services to customers.
Okay, cool. I like that. Hey, quick shout out to our YouTube guests, people that are streaming on YouTube. We are live on a few different channels. So, Sylvia, you are live on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitch. How do you feel about that?
Wow, nice.
Pretty cool, huh? The internet, right? Am I right?
Yeah, that's so cool.
Okay, Robbie. So now we've teased Robbie a little bit. You're playing guest in this, Robbie. Can you maybe talk about how you're related to what we're about to talk about in the local zone and what the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So Sylvia gets to build the product, and then we want to communicate to customers, build workshop, demos, presentations. I serve as the service developer advocate, engaging the developer community, just like episodes like this, helping to explain, demystify what a local zone is and why you should care. I saw all these folks tuning in, waving, say hello from New York City. And what if I told you that AWS had global infrastructure in the city that you just said hello from? That's what we're unpacking here today.
That's pretty cool. We're gonna have to get into that a little bit deeper, because I know folks, and if you're not familiar with just how infrastructure, how maybe the topology of AWS infrastructure works, local zones are like that bleeding edge latency driven thing. So we'll get into that quickly. And I lost my train of thought, Robbie. So so Sylvia does the real work. Robbie just goes and talks about it. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Sylvia can tell us a lot more.
Just to remind folks that we have other responsibilities. I would love to stream all day. I might get tired after a while, but we don't do that. We have other jobs. Sylvia. Okay, so Sylvia, let's get into local zones. And Robbie, are you going to ask questions? Do I got to come up with all the questions?
You're doing, I'd say, 90% of the questions. Okay. I'll ask only questions if need be.
All right. I do have some Tiger Balm here in case my back starts hurting from carrying this interview. It's powerful stuff. Mentholated. So Sylvia, we're talking about local zones. Help me understand the context that we're working in here. We have a local zone implies that we have local infrastructure inside of New York City. How does that relate to the global infrastructure that we so often talk about at AWS?
Yeah. So I guess before that, does the audience know about local zones? Trying to get a better sense of the audience over here?
Yeah, audience, have you worked with local zones? What do you know about AWS infrastructure generally? Let's get into the chat.
Let's start with the basics, Sylvia.
Let's start with the basics.
Yes. So AWS Local Zones, we are a type of AWS infrastructure that extend AWS cloud to more metropolitan areas, including New York, Perth, many more places around the world, and to bring applications closer to where the customers need it. And specifically, we started in 2019 for low latency in Los Angeles. And at that time, we heard customers in media and entertainment, such as Netflix, they really want low latency for their media and entertainment workloads. So we started our journey in Los Angeles with 2 local zones over there. And started in 2020, we started to build our local zones in the US for US expansion. Now we are live in 17 locations in New York, in the US, including New York. And as we started from low latency, we also got to know customers more, and we know customers with more use cases, such as data residency. For example, real money gaming customers, they want low latency and workloads within the state boundaries. So we have data residency workloads and hybrid migration workloads. And for customers who use local zones as a stepstone to fully migrate to the cloud. Or they use local zones as a hybrid mode to connect with their on-premise data centers to architect their workloads. And the story goes on. in 2020. In 2022, we started our global expansion. Now we are live in 17 locations globally outside of the US. And as customers' demand evolved, in 2023, we started to do more. We built more local zones with newer generation of instances, more services, and more EBS volume types, and more local zones and features. For example, New York. And also, last year, we had Atlanta with a P5 instances for Gen AI capabilities, FSx cluster, and EKS that we just mentioned with managed node groups in local zones as well. So now, fast forward, New York. So in January, we just launched the local zone in New York, and with the newer generation of instances, as I mentioned. Besides that, we have microsecond accurate time of Amazon time sync in this new local zone to support the workloads, and specifically, especially for the financial service customers. That's a very quick introduction about local zones.
Yeah, that was well done. It's like, I think you've done that before. That was well done. So let me see if I understand what you're saying here. So we can put it in terms so that my small brain can comprehend. We have this global infrastructure, and we break that infrastructure down into regions. In fact, some of our guests might have already heard billion-dollar announcements and building regions here and building regions there. I think we have one in Mexico coming up. We have ones all over the world. And those regions host our AWS services that everybody gets to interact with in some varying degrees. But we've heard from customers that we need like the fastest access to AWS services imaginable. And having those regions, maybe say in Mexico or somewhere else, just wasn't as fast as we needed it. And so one of the ways that we can break that latency barrier is just physical proximity to the actual hardware that are running these services. So the closer we can get, the shorter that cable is, the faster. We're talking like extremely fast. So in order to solve that challenge, we created this thing called a local zone. So major metropolitan areas where there are a lot of people who may need access to some of those AWS services can now have them, can solve for use cases that require that. I don't know. What are we talking about? Nanoseconds, subseconds? What kind of speed are we talking about here, Robbie?
It's going to vary, like everything, it's going to depend on where you are, what you're doing, but it's single-digit millisecond latency is always the goal. So that's our goal, to be able to say if you're pinging an instance in that geo. So if I'm in New York, we're actually going to see this. You know, you're stealing the thunder of the demo in a bit in the best of ways.
Oh, am I teasing it too much?
Yeah, well, because I'm here based in New York City in my very small box size apartment. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up an instance in the local zone, also here in New York City, and race it against the nearest AWS region. So we're going to see that firsthand.
Well, let's do it. I mean, can we bring that up? Is it too early to? I mean, now you got me all jacked about it.
I think we could do that, but alongside, maybe we ask Sylvia a few questions, because there's so many. What I love about local zones, and we can share my screen here as we work through this. I think
so. Sylvia, I do want to ask you a question, Sylvia. So, like some of our regions, my understanding is not all AWS services are supported in a local zone. Maybe just there's a subset, or is it all services? What's the difference between what the region supports versus what the local zone supports?
So currently, local zones do only support a subset of the region services.
Okay.
But it's because of our use cases. We wanted to provide customers low latency data residency and hybrid migration capabilities, and to meet customers' use cases for that. And to do that, we have compute, storage, and load balancer, and a few other services in local zones. And over time, as we see more customer demand, of course, we're working on bringing more services and keep capabilities into local zones.
Okay. So it's going to grow so we work backwards from customers. As customers want new features, we'll start to onboard those services by use case. Okay, that makes sense. And Robbie, what are you showing us here?
Well, I was just trying to have fun with asking the chat. Tell us if you're calling in or streaming from a city local zone. My point is, it's kind of overwhelming to do this kind of infinite scroll, but that's the point, right? We're bringing compute and storage services you know and love, the same operational consistency, the same developer experience, which I'm about to prove, in all these new geos.
So Sylvia, if I wanted to, let's say I'm used to working in the AWS console and working within the context of a region, and I know we have like US East 1 or US East 2, and I'm often selecting the one I'm closest to because I care about at least to some degree latency and being closest to my customers or where people might use the workload that I'm developing. What's the experience like if I want to use a local zone? Is it? Oh, wait a minute. I'm seeing.
Yeah, Robbie is showing it.
You're pilot. I'm co-pilot. You know, you're on the mic, and I'll just keep driving here.
Got it. So it's almost just like a region. I can just go into that little region switcher, and I can select a zone instead.
Exactly.
Local.
So now, yes, Robbie is showing all the local zones that's parenting to the US East 1 region. And you can see New York right there.
Okay. Manage local zones. So you can opt in. You have to opt into the local zone.
It's an opt-in basis. You tell us what you want, and opting in, absolutely free. This is just giving you access to use the resource if you so choose, but it is a hard prerequisite.
So how would I know what services are available in that local zone versus what? How would I be able to determine what I can use in that local zone?
Docs is the short answer. The easiest way is just go to the local zone service page, scroll down to find the local zone in a service in a city near you. And so that'll show me the instance types. That'll show me the storage volume types. Let's blow this up to make it a little bit bigger.
And that is your first public service announcement of the day. A friendly reminder to everybody out there to read the docs. In fact, I have this nice acronym tattooed on my finger, CRUD. If you work in development, you're familiar with the term CRUD. The second acronym is READ, and that's just to remind myself, go read. Instead of asking a bunch of questions, go read the docs. Exactly. Okay, so Robbie, that's in the docs. So we can figure out what services are available, how to enable them. That's all in the documentation, and we're in the AWS console now looking at some of that.
That's exactly right. And what I love about this this episode is so often we cover the latest tier 1 launch, and it implies a lot of domain knowledge. Usually, while we always start from the 100 level, this might be a domain that you've never started with. But if you've built on AWS at any capacity, it's likely that the simplest possible thing you've done is launch your first EC2 instance. And I want you to compare that experience that you might have had to what we're about to do with local zones. And you're going to soon realize, wait a minute, this is the exact same thing. And that's the point, because what if I told you you could have the exact same developer experience to reduce your latency or comply with local data residency requirements or support a hybrid cloud migration, all using the services you know and love. And I'll do it from scratch. You start with that VPC. This, again, has nothing to do really with the local zone instance itself. We need that logically isolated environment. So I'm going to call this OnAir demo. I need some IP addresses that I'm going to be using for this VPC. And then I need an internet gateway, because if you want a low latency application, you're going to need to be able to connect to the internet in some capacity. So my apartment in Manhattan can talk to this thing. So I'm going to call this my OnAir internet gateway. I'm intentionally going quickly because some people may have seen this, but if you haven't, know that this is just AWS Compute Foundation 100 level. This is how you launch instances today, having nothing to do with a local zone. I'm going to go ahead and attach this to the VPC so that traffic that I want out the internet in a lower latency fashion can do so. And now all I'm going to do is create a subnet. So this is a subset of my logically isolated environment. And again, this is what you do in the region today. So if I'm in Northern Virginia and I want to launch my first instance, that's what I love about getting to this demo. This is like so fundamentally universal to pretty much anything anyone is building anywhere. So we're going to call this the OnAir New York City Awesome Local Zone. This is my point exactly. You could launch your subnet. Okay, you use the Philadelphia local zone, even though you're in sub. Huge shout out. Thank you, Evan. We're going to use the New York City subnet today, or New York City local zone rather. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll down and hit the New York City local zone. But I could have done this in the region. That's the only difference. One drop-down arrow determines whether these cloud resources are in Northern Virginia or somewhere else. And the somewhere else in this case is the New York City local zone. And once I assign some IP addresses for that subnet, and I go to the route table. This is why we love live demos. Anything can happen, folks. We go to this route table and we say, hey, remember that internet gateway that we just tried to create? We're going to make sure that low latency traffic goes up that internet gateway. And now we're ready to launch our first EC2 instance. So Todd, from your perspective, this is exactly like the region, right?
Yeah,
you've done this before.
Yeah, dude, I can tell you've done it a lot of times. You're moving so quick, man. It's like you already know where the buttons are.
The point that we want to highlight, though, is this should look the same. This should feel the same.
Yeah.
That was, Sylvia, keep me honest. That's how you not only built the first services on local zones, but every service thereafter, right?
Exactly.
So let's launch our first instance. What are we going to call this? This is our local zone demo. And again, you choose your Amazon machine image. What operating system do you want in this thing? Amazon Linux, Ubuntu, et cetera, et cetera. This is a really, really cool feature. Sylvia, can you tell us about this feature? Because I can choose between more than like 200 instance types, and I don't know what to choose. But it seems like now I don't have to, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's automatically filtered.
So now I can choose instead of having to choose from 200 instance types, because if you remember, not all of them are supported, the console automatically filters down those instances that are actually available in that zone. Pretty cool.
Nice.
You pick your key pair. And let's hear from the chat. I've been doing a lot of talking. How would you use low latency edge compute?
Yeah, that's
today?
where my head's going. It's like, okay, when would I use this? What are some of the use cases? And I'm trying to think, okay, what are some of our more latency sensitive? I'm thinking video, like streaming. I'm thinking real-time gaming, maybe virtual desktop for local folks, maybe some advanced compute you want, maybe you're doing research or financial services. Makes sense in New York. We're in New York. We're talking financial services. We want that those trades and that market analysis happen quickly. Sylvia, what else am I thinking of? How else are people using local zones?
Yeah, you mentioned real money gaming and healthcare customers, for example.
Healthcare, yeah. It's a good
Education customers too. So many of them.
Right. So you think about latency. I mean, look no further than Epic Games. You go to our customers page, you'll see Epic Games. Fortnite players are using local zones unbeknownst to them. Like, that's a perfect example. People pay to optimize for latency all the time, whether it's through you buying your own fancy computer or you increase the speed of your Wi-Fi. That's one approach. But what if the cloud just came closer to you? That's the idea.
Yeah, I like that. That's a promo right there. We're bringing the cloud closer to you.
Exactly. And I hope I've convinced you to this point that the experience is 100% similar. If you still don't believe me, let's just keep going. If I take an instance that I just created and I go in, SSHing in to go configure it, I could go run anything that I want. In fact, let's go figure out what the IP address of this machine is. Let's go do some latency testing here.
Ping, ping.
Well,
we got an extra bracket.
You see that, folks? This is real. This is not a simulation. 8.1 milliseconds. Live test.
7. All right.
We don't have to do this forever, but you get the point.
yeah. That's fast.
You can see that we saw here was 7 milliseconds. So if you're a customer like Netflix, where latency matters for content creation, if you're a customer like Epic Games, if you're a university building a hybrid cloud migration, a healthcare company, a sports betting company, latency matters to customer experience.
We've got IoT in the chat. Is there an IoT use case here?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, certainly for IoT, where you need some rapid response, I'm thinking like healthcare.
First time responder. Sure, yeah.
Absolutely. Traffic light system monitoring for real-time crashes, or accident prevention. I'm thinking specifically vehicle to everything connectivity, often referred to as V2X, is going to be huge as we think about autonomous mobility. But again, it's not because we have this one New York City local zone. It's because there's more than 40 of them across the globe. And this is not an or. So if there's one key takeaway to the audience here, you might be asking, how do I use local zones? The biggest takeaway is it's an and, not an either or. You extend the regions you know and love to cities where you need the low latency compute and leverage accordingly. It is not a replacement, it's a complement. And that is exactly how our customers use them today. Yep, exactly, Ruben.
Hospitals, we got stock trading. The chat is coming up with all kinds of stuff.
And we only have 1 more minute left, so I want to do one quick thing. We did our space race. We saw 7 milliseconds of latency. And I want to just do a quick comparison to the nearest region, just to show you an example of some of the latency benefits you might expect. So it could be significant. Remember, we're already dealing with such small numbers to begin with, and the region is already low latency to begin with.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to really think like, it's hard for me to contextualize like the millisecond, right? Like I know what a second is, but like I don't experience life in milliseconds. I mean, I do, but I'm not like thinking about it in terms of milliseconds. So when I get to these use cases where that matters, it's hard for me to contextualize, but it does matter. There are folks that need that kind of instantaneous, that rapid, like especially with streaming, you want to see it as it happens, not milliseconds after it happens. I don't want to be the guy saying, "Did you see that touchdown?" and then nobody else saw it, and I ruined it.
Our eye can only perceive 250 milliseconds worth of changes. That's as quickly as we can perceive changes in visuals. But as Wesley pointed out, banking, financial institutions, we're here in New York City, localizing high frequency trading, every millisecond counts. Now, I know we're out of time, Todd, but I hope that gave everyone a sneak preview of what the power of local zones have to offer, how it's coming in a city near you. We'd love to hear your feedback. Ask me the easy questions, ask Sylvia the hard questions. Everybody learned something.
Yeah, Sylvia, thanks for coming on, and thanks for letting us know about the new NYC local zone. I think, things I'm taking away, it's the same experience. Go read the docs, and latency matters. Those are my 3 key takeaways.
Matters so much. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Sylvia. Have a good weekend. Nice. Robbie, how many times have you done that demo, honest? How many times have you in your life, how many times have you configured a VPC?
Yeah, hundreds, which I think that's not a good thing. Remember that I just did self-admitted to not using automation and introducing human error through the AWS console experience. So sorry, not sorry, ? But we do our best.
No, it was awesome, man. It was a great demo, and I think it really drove home the point. And I appreciate the way that you explained it, the way Sylvia explained it. It makes a lot of sense to me now, and I'm ready. I feel like I can go talk to customers about local zones now, and I think that's really great. Who do we got next, Robbie? We are bringing on our Repost Live friends, our new Repost segment for the year. It's one of my favorite segments that we've launched recently. Shall we bring them on?
Let's do it. Let's bring on the Repost Live team.
Dang it. There we go. Okay. Hey, everybody. How you doing?
Looks like we have a technical glitch. Let's figure this out. All right. I guess I can pretty much kick it off here. I guess there is a small glitch for Steven. So welcome to Repost Live segment here. So we are going to dive deep into some of the user questions that we are getting in the Repost community. So Repost, if you are not familiar with Repost, just use your favorite browser, head over to repost.aws, sign up using your AWS account ID or builder ID, and start asking questions. That's the community where you can ask questions. You can read about any articles, right? We have a lot of articles out there. You can join a community. You just heard about EKS and you heard about local zones. So we have a lot of community there as well. So just head over to Repost, sign up using your AWS account ID or builder ID, and then you can get started as well. I guess the glitch is slowly getting resolved, Robbie. Is that what is?
I'm Steven, I guess. Let's do it. Tell me everything I need to know about AWS Repost.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Steven has a minor glitch. So Robbie is taking over the role of Steven, which is always fun. So again, as I mentioned, right, so we are going to dive deep into the questions from the community here and then try to answer that. And if you have a questions, right, just shoot that question and we'll try to address that live on the show as well. That's the fun part we do at Repost as well. With that, I want to just show a question which is over here. So if you can get the screen here, yeah, there you go. So Robbie, right? We had a very exciting topic around KRO, and when I learned about KRO, I was like, oh wow, that's a very interesting term itself, right? KRO. So we got this question from the community. Cloud Guru 567 is asking about hey, Kube Resource Orchestrator versus infrastructure as code tools, right? I think when we kind of touched that topic a little bit during the previous segment, we also mentioned that, hey, what is the advantages of KRO, and when you compare that with something like CloudFormation or Terraform, right? What is the major advantage of KRO, right? So that was the question we got, right? And I love this question. I'm going to say, thumbs up. It says I need to sign in. That's a different story for a day, but it's a great question. And the way we kind of handle these questions within Repost is we will address that using the vast amount of AWS experts we have within Amazon or AWS or the community as well, right? So this question has been answered already. And if you note the answer, and it's a very detailed answer, it was actually answered by a Repost agent, right? Which is pretty cool, Robbie. So we have now AI agents that's going, checking questions, and then answering it for you. That's super cool, right? It's a very detailed answer, and I'm not really going to spend reading the whole answer. You can actually check that out. But in a gist, right? It's pretty much, what it's kind of saying is like, if you are like very much focused on Kubernetes centric environment, right? If you are really focused on Kubernetes centric environments, that's where KRO is going to be really going to add a lot of value, right? As you saw in the demo, if you want to create a S3 bucket, and the demo couldn't actually create more resources because of the time constraints, but if you want to create, let's say, for example, databases, right? If you want to spin up a DynamoDB, if you want to create some IAM roles for that matter, right? That's all possible within the construct of Kubernetes itself, right? One comment I really liked was, bring AWS as part of your Kubernetes cluster, right, Robbie? That was pretty exciting. Anything you want to touch on that, Robbie?
Yeah, I mean, the way I basically read this is it's sort of like not an either or, it's an and. You could use CloudFormation to create the EKS cluster itself. So infrastructure automation, the core underlying resource, absolutely great choice for CloudFormation. But the point is, if I wanted to create, I've got like a web app, and it's the RobbieSucks.com, and it's got like a web app based in Nginx, an that then exposes my web app as a load balancer. Those Kubernetes native structures don't have an equivalent like declarative infrastructure as code alternative because they're Kubernetes abstractions. So what KRO is basically doing is it's saying, hey, you love this experience of being able to create your cookbook and it automatically deducing dependencies. I'm going to do it for you in the Kubernetes native way.
Yeah, absolutely. That is pretty amazing, right? And I have actually customers who love that kind of an experience because they are very much deeply integrated with EKS and Kubernetes world. So they want to kind of have that capability to, create these additional resources within the context of Kubernetes cluster, which is super amazing. And I think, Robbie, one thing which I feel is very important to discuss is GitOps workflows, right? KRO, I feel, is very well aligned with GitOps kind of workflows and DevOps workflows, right? So that actually make sense to kind of leverage KRO more if you're really into that Kubernetes centric environments and really deeply integrated with GitOps workflows and all, right? That's essentially the answer for that particular question. I hope Cloud Guru 567, I hope that pretty much answers the question. And again, as I mentioned, we have a great detailed answer by our AI agent. So please take a look at the answer and then let us know more on the comments as well. In the interest of time, going further forward, right?
So before we do that, Anoop, I just want to jump in and say, I think the real Steven is back. So I think I might be able to take a step back and bring Steven on. I was temporarily.
All right, I'm
the real one.
So
I'm back, and we'll see how things go. So,
so
I think a
kind of
flock
say
of
this-
seagulls came by and disrupted things. So we'll see. Sorry, Anup. I'm back.
Yeah, that's awesome, right? I kind of say this all the time, right? We had a failover and we kind of gracefully came back well as well, right? Cool. I want to wrap up the KRO world and then I'll pass it back to you, Stephen, to kind of talk about local zones as well, right? So we have one more question on the KRO side, talking about hey, how does KRO integrate with monitoring and logging systems, right? That's a very interesting question. And my answer, and we have an answer here as well, but again, my perspective around this is KRO is relatively kind of a new experimental project, right? Introduced by AWS. You saw that and you heard about that in the previous segment. And specific details about its integration with monitoring and logging systems is not there yet. But again, since it is very Kubernetes centric, right? It's kind of you can imagine that some of the things like integrations with Fluentd, for example, CloudWatch, for example, those will be available, right? So that is definitely going to be there. And from a metric standpoint, as a Kubernetes native tool, right? KRO can actually expose metrics in Prometheus too, right? So those are some of the areas where we're kind of still navigating. And since this is a brand new project, some of the details are not there yet. But again, that's a space where we are navigating, and more info will be there, right? So we're going to again keep updating the space for sure, and then we'll have more answers around that monitoring and logging perspective of KRO too, right? With that, Stephen, I want to pass it to you. I was super excited to learn about local zones today. Heard about P5 instance in local zone, which is mind blowing to me, at least. Stephen, you have any questions?
Yeah, Not with KRO. I mean, I'm not a cube head, so I'm not as versed in this. So hey, thanks, Jay. Love the show. Repost, appreciate it. We've got some, we've had some glitches here, but we're powering through. But we're going to take a turn now, not quite as the crow flies, back to local zones. And if you saw earlier, Robbie and Sylvia kind of talking about that in excitement. We've got some questions here from our repost community around some of the local zones. So let me see if my screen share works. So let's bring up my screen here. And hopefully, it's probably because I didn't, do the demo god dance or something like that to see that things were working.
Yeah,
so one of the first, it is. We'll see. So one of the first thing here, questions we got from Mark, repost user, can you help identify the benefits and drawbacks of enabling local zones? So I think some of the biggest benefits here, and if you were on earlier and saw the demo, right, it's having that low latency, right? Being able to take those AWS services and bring them closer to where you need them. And the really, one of the additional benefits here is if you come in, we've got an answer from Steve N, who kind of outlines that and links to some of that additional information. As we pointed out, right here, you can come out to this page. You can see what in the local zones, what services there are. So if you have need of these services, this is what's available and this is what you can use in that local zone. Obviously, the one drawback is not all of our AWS services are available there in a local zone, which, there's some benefits and trade-off there. Shout out earlier, somebody was using the Philadelphia local zone. I probably should have been using the Boston local zone here to come at you today. So you have all of that here. And, it's really, it's getting that workload closer to where you're going to need it.
Right.
And if you have any questions, things like that, absolutely throw them in chat. Also, don't forget in chat, we've got that survey out there. If you take that survey, you have a chance of winning $20 in account credits. So definitely get in there in the comments and take that survey and sharing things out. Moving on, couple more questions that we've got here around it. Are there reserved instances for local zones, right? From Andreas, asking, do we have that ability to apply some of those savings plans or discounts there in local zones? So the answer is no, not for RIs, but you can apply savings plans. So if you've got savings plans that are on your account that you're doing there to get discounts on that compute usage, right? That means what you're using in that local zone and spinning that up is going to be and apply the same way. So, it's having that same benefit. I think Robbie really touched on that, right? You're deploying that same thing. If I need to deploy that service, it's there just like any other place, other region, other availability zone that, wanting to do that in. So the last question I got here, and this is kind of the cool one. It's not a question. It's more of an announcement. And, they kind of touched on that. You've got those use cases. Game development's one of them. Our Amazon Game Lift service supports local zones. So when you want to take your game, develop your game, you can develop it on our managed game service here with Game Lift, build that game, and then deploy it to where your users are, giving them the best gaming experience with that low latency wherever it is. I loved hearing in the comments as well earlier some of the other use cases, hospitals or casino, gaming applications, betting applications, things like that. You've got those also requirements for, having to be in a certain physical location, and local zones is another great way to kind of meet those requirements and things like that. So really, really cool set of opportunities. If you think about it, there's probably an opportunity for you to use it here. Obviously, like gaming and some of these bigger services, maybe not. But hey, maybe you just want to develop and write your own game and have your own LAN party, right? As a throwback and play your games locally with your friends. That's probably another option that you got there. So with that, I guess, Anup, any other things that you've got for us to talk about here today?
So I think local zone, right? I'm very impressed with local zone. I mean, the latency, what Roby showed was pretty amazing. And like I mentioned, right, having P5 instances with H100s NVIDIA gear, that's mind blowing. Atlanta is what I heard was the local zone which has these P5 instances, which is great as well, right? For everything machine learning. Yeah, I think exciting times.
Awesome. Thanks for your questions, everybody. We're going to link the recordings of the show in the comments for the repost questions we covered for you to review later. I hope our explanations and our demos and other things really, helped you learn something today. I know I learned some stuff today. And, be sure to head over to repost, sign up using your account or Builder ID to start expanding your AWS cloud knowledge. And, I think, what else? Before we sign off,
I would highly encourage people to head over to repos.aws, sign up using your Builder ID or AWS account ID. It's super easy. Stay tuned to Repost Live. There's a lot of goodness here. We'd love to answer your question. Again, Repost Live, one of the best communities in the internet for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Don't forget to subscribe here for more AWS Repost Live content and similar shows. And until next time from us, happy building.
Happy building.
All right, that's it, Todd. We need to both fill out the survey and say we need new music. The Repost Live hype music and outro. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I was vibing. I was vibing hard. I was feeling so cool. I put on the shades, man. It's getting warm, and I got a fresh smattering of Tiger Balm on for this interview, so I'm feeling good right now.
I don't blame you. We've got our ducks in a row. Now the show is live. I think, when I first tried to ping the instance, it wasn't even an IP address. Real things happen, but we wing it. We figure it out. And that's how you know this is AWS On Air.
Got the best producers in live stream business working behind the scenes to make sure things just go off. People come on, people come off. And so thank you, Nick and Tina and Debbie, for all that you do.
We wouldn't be
here. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Robbie, what do we got coming up? What do we got next week? I got one thing. What else do we got?
Oh, you'll have to remind me. I think we've got Kyle and AM, the dynamic duo, hosting.
So security incident response was one thing that I heard. And then I'm also, the team that I work for is called the AWS Solutions Library team. We launch solutions that solve everyday challenges for our customers, and we host those in a repository called the AWS Solutions Library. And we're going to be showcasing a brand new launch of one of those solutions that shows you how to use agents to automatically route non-human data sources through a call center. So you got an IoT device that throws an error. How do you automatically route and resolve that ticket through using agents and Gen AI and all the cool new buzzwordy things. So I'm really looking forward to that. I don't think that I'll be hosting that, but I'll be certainly watching it.
I'll be watching it too. And for those who don't get a chance to watch this episode or next week's episode live, so many opportunities to stream, restream, reshare, and yet restream again. You can catch us on, I think, LinkedIn. You can catch us on twitch.tv/AWS. Slight modification at the start of this month. And come find us with any questions, right?
That's right. Hey, thanks, Robbie, for teaching us about local zones today. I learned a lot.
I like being a guest. It was cool. I think, if you'll have me, I'll stick with the host job. But, every so often you bring me back as a guest. It's kind of fun. I'll do it again.
Yeah. All right. Fill out that survey, folks, and let's cue that outro music. Let's vibe to some outros.